Welcome to the Right Room with Hilary Phelps. Today's guest is Michele Capots, and she is a transformational coach, speaker, storyteller on the power of mental wellness and resilience, who has had essays on mental health published in Newsweek, the Washington Post Magazine, Marie Claire, and more. Today, she shares with us her powerful story of at 5 years sober, she had a manic episode, found herself on the side of the interstate hitchhiking in her pajamas. It's a really powerful story of resilience, overcoming adversity, mental wellness, mental health, addiction, and how women can navigate these transitions and find the power within themselves to overcome all of the challenges. So I hope you tune in and enjoy our episode. Hello, Michele. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for joining us on the Right Room today. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
I am excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And we just discovered, that we are kind of neighbors.
We
I
are
love
neighbors.
this.
Very close.
I love this. Because we connected over digital, and then we're like, wait a second, we're not far. We should do this in person someday.
Absolutely. I love it.
I love that too. So, the Right Room, as you know, is a place for women who are navigating challenges. And I know you do some of the same work, and I'm excited to dive into that. And, the purpose of the podcast is to share these transformational stories. And so that one woman, maybe that's navigating something challenging in her life, or here's something in your story that helps her identify a challenge in her life. And so this is really the space to do it. And I would love to start by having you just tell a little bit about you, who you are today.
Okay, excellent. So I am a transformational coach, international speaker, and writer and storyteller with a focus on mental wellness and resilience. And that began after I was in my 30s and I had just overcome a clinical depression, which I'll tell you a little more about later. But I just overcome a clinical depression. I was working at a national magazine. I had just moved in with my boyfriend. We were talking about marriage. I was checking off the boxes in my head. I felt like my life was just taking off. But I found myself on a summer day pacing back and forth on the side of an interstate, wondering, what am I going to do? My heart was beating a mile a minute. The only thing I could hear was the whoosh of the cars whizzing by me. I was wearing Tasmanian devil boxer shorts that were sliding off my sweaty legs. I had a t-shirt that was ripped all the way up to my breast that I was wiping sweat from my brow. I was barefoot. The hot gravel beneath my feet pierced my feet, and my dog was beside me, not on a leash. And in that moment, I decided to do something that I'd only seen work in the movies and stuck out my thumb. And no one
to hitchhike.
Okay. And no one would stop. And that was the day. Have you ever gone down to a place you've never been before, or down to a place of despair, or down to a place of shame? But after being out there, what felt like forever, a fire truck came by and picked me up and took me to the hospital. I was in the middle of a manic episode. And what felt like first that was when I first started to crawl. And then a little while later, it turned into a walk. And eventually it turned into a run. And what I thought was so hopeful, I now stand proud and tall and share that story, because what I've learned from that experience is just how resilient I am. I've learned, and this was the hardest thing to learn, that there's an I in illness, but a we in wellness. And I've learned that mental well-being, my mental well-being, had to be my number one priority. And that created a commitment and a mission in me to want to help others create the same thing in their own life.
So can we go back to that moment for a second
Yes,
on the side of
please.
the road? And so you described this has happened after you kind of had what society would say is great things happen to you. You were
Mhm.
running a magazine, you had a live-in boyfriend, or you had a serious boyfriend. You were talking about marriage. You felt like you would just overcome depression, and yet this is where you found yourself.
Mhm.
Can you describe what that was like? I mean, what did you feel? Because I imagine, right, as we're walking through this and you're telling me, and I can feel like I'm there with you, you feel like victorious, right? You're like, have these great things going on, yet this is, you kind of find yourself in this navigating a really hard episode. I mean, what was that like for you?
I think that, well, let me backtrack for a moment, because this was really important. That depression that I'd overcome, I was in my late 20s when that happened. And that experience got me sober.
Mm,
So I had been, I was in the middle of a clinical depression. I had been suicidal. Um, I was at my absolute, that was my rock bottom. That was my absolute lowest point. So I had climbed out of that. At this point, I had 5 years of sobriety. I felt like I had turned my life around, and all of these things were happening now. So it wasn't just that my life was taking off, it was that I had built this back up. So it was devastating,
so
is
you
my
were
point.
5 years sober
I
when
was
you
5
had this
years
breakup.
sober
And
when I had this happen.
I think that's so important because I don't know about you. When I got sober, I was like, now life is perfect. Great. Now all of my problems are going to melt away. But at 5 years sober, you're navigating this this challenging situation, right? And kind of going through this episode. And so talk about that a little bit, because so the depression led you to sobriety. And then after, but I also think this is, I'm gonna let you answer that. Sorry, I know I asked you a question. I'm jumping in, but I know there's something into like, had we not gotten sober, at least for me, I know I wouldn't have been able to navigate other challenging situations, right? So for me, my depression was diagnosed after I got sober, and it was around 10 years, 5 years, same thing. But mine
Mhm.
kind of was reversed. But had I not been sober, I don't feel like I would have been able to address my depression.
I, I was a binge drinker.
Mm,
So I had a really hard time when I got sober accepting that I belonged there, because I kept comparing now. I
yeah,
looked at
yeah, I
all
get
these
that.
different stories and thought, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me.
Comparing out, yeah.
And it was very easy to compare out. But what someone told me when I started to identify on that feeling of emptiness, that hole that so many people, so we all
Yes.
experience, the stories didn't matter as much. It was the feeling of despair. It was the feeling of emptiness. It was the feeling of being hollow that I was able to identify with. But it was a struggle when I came in because I'd never gotten a DUI. I'd never been to rehab, but I was a Jekyll and Hyde drinker. When I drank, something different happened to me. Um,
I love this
e-
distinction because too, I've had someone tell me like, you have a high bottom. And
exactly.
I'm like, to me, and I was like, but I was a blackout drinker and it was enough for me, right? And that's the important thing when it comes to sobriety and addiction. It's like, when is it enough for us? Like one person I heard got sober after one blackout. I was like, I had two blackouts every weekend, I mean,
Exactly.
and so
Exactly.
I love that you're bringing this up, that it's the feeling that connects people in addiction or that loneliness, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. But it's so easy to listen to the stories and not necessarily see yourself. But when you connect on that feeling, when you relate to the feeling,
Mhm.
you know you belong. At least I knew that I belonged. And I love what you said about high bottom drunk because I got that all the time. You had such a high bottom. Really? I was suicidal.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, it wasn't for
Yeah.
me. It was my absolute rock bottom. Um, so fast forward, I had 5 years of sobriety. And like you said, I'd changed my life around. I'd moved to a new city. I got this job. I was with this boyfriend. Everything I'd built back up, everything was taking off. And then to find myself in that situation again, I was angry. Um, because I didn't understand why this was happening. And let me preface that it happened not just once, but again and again. And each time, so I had a 3 year period
What
where
what happened again and again? You say it
the
happened.
manic episode,
Okay.
I was having manic episodes again and finding myself in the hospital again. So I had a 3 year period where from I think 2002 to 2005 that I felt like that game whack-a-mole. Every time I popped up with the LED
Yeah.
lights where you hit it on the hammer, every
Mhm.
time I popped up to get well, I was being knocked back down again. And it wasn't just the anger, it was the shame that went along with it because I had to walk back into that national magazine with people knowing where I was and what happened. And I remember the first day back standing after I had been out for 2 weeks. I'd been in the hospital, was my first day back in the office. And I remember standing in that elevator all by myself and holding my breath as I watched the floors light up 1, 2, 3, 4. And when it got to the fifth floor, I exhaled and I took a step forward, but I kept my head down, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. I was embarrassed. And when I got to my desk, I found flowers and a welcome back card that everybody had signed. And people even came over to let me know that maybe they had a mental health challenge. And it helped me not feel so all alone. But again, it would happen again for me. And I keep having to repeat that scenario of walking back in. And there would be a time that I lost that dream job, that with it, I lost all hope of ever having the kind of life I wanted. There are many of us that have a tendency to lower our expectations of ourselves, or at our lowest point, we give up on ourselves because we think that we're not good enough to have the life we want. And I did that. I was someone that lowered my expectations of myself without even realizing it.
And it sounds like a lot of that identity, like you just said, was tied into that job, right? That external thing. Because you said, now I wouldn't have the life that I wanted anymore because I was no longer here, right? So that like attachment to things, which we're both in recovery, we know that anything, right, that we're so attached to, or we put, I'm not saying you put it ahead of your recovery, but it feels like such a, yeah, a loss. I mean, and it was a loss, but can you talk about how, one, like how you were so tied to that, and two, how did you overcome that identity change, right? Meaning if your identity was so rooted, right, in that job, how did you navigate through that transition?
So it was the job, but it was also what I made my illness mean about me. It was
Ooh, talk about that. What do you mean by
the
that?
self stigma as well. So I had, I was a writer. I'd always been a writer. And when I lost that job, I thought it meant I wasn't good enough to be a writer. I thought that my illness defined me. I thought it was all I had to offer, that all I was about was therapy or doctor's appointments or medication. I lowered the self stigma, ate away at me. I lowered my expectations of myself and my, as I said, but also my place in the world. I didn't think I was good enough to have the life I dreamed of. It wasn't just the job. It was what I made my illness mean. And for me, it meant that I was less than. I was broken. I was no longer able to live the life I dreamed of. And that's what was really so devastating. It was the identity loss, but it was also this new identity of feeling broken that I took on. And that would stay with me for a number of years because I got comfortable in that new identity. I got comfortable in that brokenness, and I stayed there. I stayed stuck in that space.
That's, and I think, and well, speaking for myself, right? I've gotten stuck in that space too, right? Where being like, I don't want to say a victim, and maybe this isn't what you're saying too, but like that was my identity too. Like, oh, I'm struggling. Oh, I'm in recovery. Oh, I'm an addict. Oh, I have depression. Oh, like, right. And that was, yeah. And sometimes that feels good for me. Like that felt comfortable. That felt like a comfortable identity for me because then, you know, it was, I think for me, I didn't know how to accept the good and talk about the good things, right? Because for me, it went back to deserving. I'm more deserving of these things than I am of the good things,
Mhm.
you know? And so then it was hard to talk to people like, how are you? I'm like, oh, well, X, Y, and Z versus, oh, this is really great thing. These are great things that are happening. Is that an accurate description of what kind of you were, the space you were into?
Yes. And there was also a sense of fear for me that it was going to happen again, that
The
I
episode.
was always afraid that I was going to have another episode. There was always that fear that this was going to happen again. I was going to be back on the highway, or I was going to find myself in that same situation. But yes, it's awfulizing. It's waiting for that other shoe to drop.
That's
It's
ex
just
yeah,
walking around kind of like this, kind of
yeah.
like, all right, and not being able, like you said, to trust the good.
Mm,
Something good would happen and I wouldn't be able to trust it
yeah.
because I don't know if it's that I didn't feel worthy of it or deserving of it. Um, or if I was just so comfortable in not having it that felt like the stretch. That felt like
And it feels uncomfortable, like, when you're waiting for this, the shoe to drop, or this metaphorical, like, when I got sober, I walked through life with, like, my fist, my metaphorical fist up, like, just waiting for something bad to happen, and I think
Mhm.
there's also this comfortability in that space because that's what, right? Like, that space is comfortable, and, I've read this, it's easier to stay in a comfortable chaos than an uncomfortable solution sometimes,
Absolutely.
and it's hard to kind of detach from that chaos if it's all we know, whether it's like, right, upbringing or childhood or addiction or toxic relationship or whatever it is, to kind of disconnect from that, to step into that unknown space, even if logically we know, right, it's going to be better over here. It's going to be better where it's not chaotic. It's still kind of, pulls you back. For me, it kind of pulls me back because it's like, well, I know it's not, I know addiction's not good. I know I don't feel okay when I drink. I know I struggle. I know I black out and all of these things, but I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. And that fear of the unknown sometimes is even stronger than, right?
That fear of the unknown can be paralyzing. And,
Yes.
and that's even true in, um, so that fear or that judgment that I had of myself, the judgment of what I made my illness mean about me, um, that doesn't go away easily. That can stay with you even if you don't realize it under the surface. It was, and I'll go here in a minute, but it was years that I've been in recovery, mental health recovery, that I haven't had another episode since 2005. So I've had decades of mental health recovery, but that self stigma um, was still there under the surface and still guiding my life choices without me even realizing it was there. And if you don't see it, you can't break free from it. And I stayed in that space for way too long in, I call it being stuck. I was unable to move out of it. I was unable to, as I said, trust the good. And even though that doesn't mean that I've stayed in that particular space all these years, but there's still been that little bit of judgment that I talked about, that there's still been that, um, is it going to happen again? Or you're not, um,
Like fear.
it's the fear.
And
It's,
you've heard the acronym for fear. Well, there are a couple, but false
there are a
evidence.
couple. There are a
False.
couple.
We'll stick with the clean one. False evidence appearing real, or
Yes.
forget everything. You can use a different word and run. Or
Face everything and
that.
recover.
Yes, that's. I was like, or and rise. That's the other. Can you?
Yes.
But fear's so powerful, right? I mean, it
Mhm.
really. Can you talk about that feeling of being stuck, and how did you navigate through that? Because I think whether it's a mental health, mental wellness, addiction, anything, at some point in our life, every woman, every person has felt stuck. But what are those feelings around being stuck for you? And what steps did you take to get out of that stuckness?
So getting out of the stuckness was an ongoing thing. But for me, I met a woman who had such a powerful influence on my life.
Mhm.
Um, and she was a woman who was a lot older than I was, but she'd had very similar life experiences, the mental health, but she didn't wear them like a dark cloud hanging over her head like I seem to. Um, she spoke with conviction and purpose, and I didn't understand how she got to that space. And the only thing she would say to me repeatedly was this one phrase, which was run toward the sound of the cannon. And every time she said it, I was always like, what?
Yeah.
What
What does
does
that
that
mean?
even, what does that even mean? And
What?
she'd say it all the time. I'd be talking about something and I'd be like, that doesn't have anything to do with what I'm even talking about. What does that even mean? And she would always explain to me that it's an old war saying that soldiers only know one way forward toward the fray, and that mental illness or addiction is a battle you have with yourself. And it's running towards your fears, towards the very things that hold you back as a way to be free instead of running away from them. And I
Wow.
never realized how much of an impact that saying would have on me then and now. It's come to mean something else to me. But then what it meant to me was being able to accept my illness, to accept the space I was in, accept that this is happening, but it is one part of me. It's only one part of so many aspects about me. And I couldn't see that before then. I thought, as I said, it defined me. I thought it was all that I was about, but it helped me to see that there were a lot of different facets of me, and I wasn't able to see that at first. So acceptance was a big part of me. The accepting where I was, that was one aspect. But today it has come to mean so much more for me in being willing to look within and accept deep truths about ourselves that maybe we don't want to see. And that's how it's metamorphosed into my life today. But learning that phrase and being willing to walk through my fears, walk toward them instead of running away from them was really powerful for me at that moment, was really powerful for me then.
That is really powerful because I'm thinking about that, like running towards your fear, tackling it head on. Because the more you run from it, the further away you get, the more, not meaning like you can never outrun it, right?
Exactly.
It'll catch up to you, and I love that. That's a lot of the women I work with. That's just saying, you have to first be aware of it, then acknowledge it, then you can take action on whatever it is. Because oftentimes we're aware of it. I'm aware that I drink too much. I'm aware, but I don't want to acknowledge it yet. Right. And so it's like, yes, I love that. Run towards the cannon.
Run toward the sound of the
The
cannon.
sound.
And it's that awareness that sometimes you're so busy running from that you don't even realize that you're running, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We can be, it's kind of like with our thoughts. Um,
Dangerous sometimes, aren't they?
Very dangerous. But because we think so many, I mean, what is it? We think something like 60,000 thoughts a day, and 75% are negative, and I think it's 90% are repetitive. And when we aren't aware of them, it's so easy to grasp onto a thought. So then, for example, it was so easy to grasp onto, this is who I am. This illness is who I am. This is what I'm about. And grasp onto that thought, often with not even realizing that I was doing it. So it's that awareness that is the first step, and then the acknowledgement or the acceptance of it.
Yeah.
So, okay, I see it, and now I can accept it. And once we accept it, we can change it,
Yeah.
because it's the judgment of that thought that can get us into such trouble.
Yeah. And I love the idea around this too. It's like nothing is good or bad. It's just information, right? And so if we can look at it that way too, whether it's, mental health, mental wellness, addiction, anything, like all of this is information. And how does this information make me feel in this moment? I don't like the way this information makes me feel. Okay, then I'm going to make a choice, and then I'm going to decide how that choice makes me feel. Oh, this choice makes me feel good. Okay, then we make another choice, and sometimes it's that simple. But you're right, like our brains and our thoughts can overcomplicate it. And when we start thinking all of those negative things, or we think people are, I think, I don't know, like I learned in recovery, what somebody thinks of me is none of my business, because I can't do anything about it. I can't change it. I can just keep showing up as me. Right. But that's
And what I've learned um, is the way those feelings, those thoughts show up in our bodies.
yes.
And exactly
Mhm.
so I think that neuroscientists, this is amazing to me, have found that it only takes 90 seconds for a sensation, for an emotion to pass through the body. That's it, 90 seconds.
Mhm.
And anything more than that
Mhm.
shows that we're reinforcing it. We're looped in the mind. So when you think about two ducks that you see on the water that come together, get in a squabble on the water, we've all seen it. They come together, they fight, then they immediately break off and flap their wings and sail on. But if it was me, if it's us, we hold on to that. Like, did you see what just happened? Did you see what he just did? And we replay it over and over and over again. And that shows up in our chest, in our stomach, in our shoulders. And if we're not aware of it, it stays. It stays in our nervous system. It stays there stuck.
Illness. Yep. Illness and
Absolutely.
disease. Well, Peter Levine wrote, I don't know, you familiar with his work, like did it like animals will shake and they'll yell, they'll move and they get the trauma out of their body. But you're right. As humans, we experience it And then,
And
yes, we relive it. And the more we relive it in our minds, the more our body feels it, right? And so if we can bring a sense of peace to our nervous system, acknowledge the sensation, it's not good or bad, it's a sensation, work through it, then we can start changing our mind pattern, right? Then we can start saying, like, okay, what if it's something different? Okay, what if? And that's how yes, that is 100% how we start to move forward. The challenge, at least for me, let me know your thoughts because I'd love to hear this too. There's, the processing of the trauma. Sometimes getting it out and sharing it helps, right? Just talking about it. But it's the repeated patterns like venting or over and over and over again that kind of re-traumatizes it. So you work with people too, having that safe space to process it, whether it's a coach, a therapist, a support group, something like that, where you can get it out and then receive constructive feedback, or you receive, or just a safe space, and for someone to acknowledge it and say, you know what, that is really hard. And that is
absolutely.
frustrating, right? And so talk about that a little bit. Like maybe the difference in like that. And I talk about processing feelings versus trying to change them, right? Because that's what addiction is. And that's what substance use. And that's what eating. And that's what shopping and all those things, trying to change the feeling versus that process. Can you talk to that? Like how to process those feelings?
So it's, and like you said, it's not good or bad, but it's allowing it,
Yes.
allowing ourselves to feel that way because, like you just said, with whether it's alcohol, shopping, eating, that's what we're avoiding
Yes.
is feeling it. We're doing anything on the outside to make us feel better on the inside. And sometimes all it's looking for is to be acknowledged.
Yes.
And it
Yeah.
can be, it doesn't, and it doesn't have to be a 3, 4 year process of, sometimes it's a very short, that 90 seconds, just allowing it, letting it be present. It's just looking to be met, to be acknowledged. And once you do, you can release it. So that was really one of my biggest aha moments because, as I said, I held on to that self stigma for so many years. But it wasn't until I started doing some of my own work and I learned how to do these things from working with a coach that I was able to see that I was never broken, that it was only my perception that was broken. It was never me. And once I realized that, everything started to change. I was able to go after my goals in a different way. I was able to face things in a different way. And it was just realizing that that I was never broken. And it wasn't until I started doing some of this work that I realized that. And it was allowing it, feeling that in order to free it.
Yes. Because we can co-sign our own BS, right? All
Absolutely.
the time. And so to your point, like working with another person, again, a therapeutic setting, a coaching, any of those things helps, it sounds like it helped you. And I've worked and it's helped me show those spaces where things are continuously, patterns are showing up, right? And you can
Mhm.
then start to, because again, we don't want to think, I mean, we're all doing the best we can with what we have in any given day, for the most part, right? Like most people. But yes, without that safe space or that somebody looking at you saying like, this is a reoccurring pattern. Do you want to look at this? Because I'm
Mhm.
not going to look at it myself because, like you said, it's painful and it
Mhm.
hurts. And we want to avoid pain and we want to avoid struggle. That's like the human experience, right? We want to feel joy and all of those things. But sometimes we got to look deep inside.
And it's also having that therapeutic space, that coach, that therapist to say, it's okay.
Yes. Cut
It's
yourself a break. It's okay.
exactly. It's okay that you feel this way. It's okay because for me anyway, it goes back to that judgment.
Mhm,
And I can judge myself so harshly
mhm.
for the way I feel about myself. Um, but having that safe person or safe space say, it's okay that you feel this way. It's not, it's okay.
Yeah,
That was a really big one for me. Just simply, it's okay. And that was even something that my mentor gave me when she showed me how to run toward the sound of the cannon was the belief that it was okay. All of the feelings, all of everything I felt, all of the brokenness, that she gave me hope that my life could be different. I looked at her and saw that she had walked through all these things and she was okay. She had done it, and that's what 12 step, that's what recovery shows us. The people that have gone through what you're going through. Um, she showed me that she had already walked this path and that it was okay.
yes, and she could show you how to do it too, right? That's the beauty. If you see
Exactly.
someone that's talking openly about their experiences and what they've been through, like you're sharing today, Michelle, like about, suicide ideation or thoughts or mental wealth, combining health and wellness, mental wellness, mental health, addiction, all of those things. You see someone that's walked through it and they have what you have, right? And that's what we learn in recovery. You see someone that has what you have, then they can show you how to get it too, right? Because they've
Absolutely.
navigated these things and they've figured it out. But I think community is one of the most important things because, like you said, without community, we do it in a silo and we do it with our,
Mhm.
with those thoughts that are bouncing between our ears, which are sometimes not the best place to be, you know.
Absolutely.
Um, but to your point, even like my therapist recently said, I was like in this, and I'm sharing all of these things that are going on, right? Because I'm thinking, I'm 17 years sober and I do all of this work and I have this and I have a coach and I have a therapist and I have all these things. So I should be good, right? Like I should be good by now. And she just looked at me and she's like, you're carrying a lot right now. And that's okay to feel that way. And someone, to your point, someone just saying that to me still felt like such a relief because I'm like, I'm an athlete and I'm a type A and I was a straight A, all these things. So I should be, right? And we start shoulding ourselves, then we can get into a lot of trouble in that space.
Absolutely. And it's just having someone acknowledge
Yeah.
where we are. It's that, um, yeah, it's
It's,
okay. You are
yeah.
carrying a lot right now, acknowledging that you have a lot on your plate
And it's okay.
and it's okay. And
Yeah.
you're going to manage it or you are managing it. It's just hearing that. And what I have found, and this was the hardest thing to do, is treating ourselves with that self compassion,
Hmm.
is giving that compassion back to ourselves in that moment, not needing someone to tell us we're okay, but being able in that difficult moment, in that difficult space, to take a breath and say to ourselves, I'm okay, or it's okay that that happened, or that you made a mistake, or that maybe you said something that you shouldn't have, or it's okay. I'm okay. And knowing and feeling that and knowing in that moment that you are. And that's where the self compassion comes in.
I like to do like little, I think of little Hilary, right? So if I start negative talk, if I'm like, oh, this and that, it's like, would I speak to my 8-year-old self that way? Would
Mhm.
I speak to would I want anybody? No. Would I talk to my 7-year-old that way? Never. So what gives me the right to talk to myself in that way? Right? Because you're
Mhm.
right, we're the hardest on ourselves. And so um, that little reminder of I wouldn't speak to my niece, nephews, or anybody, my partner, like those are, but we're really quick to speak that way about ourselves or to ourselves, right?
And that can be the most damaging.
Yeah.
That it's the story, it's the negative talk, it's what we tell ourselves that can be the most damaging. And back to what we were talking about earlier, then you end up walking around like this because your body is feeling everything that you're saying.
Mm.
Um, and you get trapped in a cycle.
That's hard to
Break free.
get. So I want to talk about this. You shared something, you said it earlier, and I want to talk about the difference. It goes mental health and mental wellness. Can you talk
There,
to that? I love this.
absolutely. There's a big difference. I see a big difference between the two in my experience, and they're often lumped together. Um, but mental health is often includes a diagnosis or therapy or medication, doctors. That's a bucket that I see mental health in.
Mhm.
But mental wellness is the actual journey. It's a lifelong process that
I love.
helps us build resilience and grow. Someone does not need to have a mental health challenge to strive for mental wellness. For some, it's simply eating right or getting enough sleep, meditation. But I see it as what we talked about, so much more than that. It involves the whole person. It's an awareness of our thoughts, and it includes our whole mind, body, and spirit. I see mental wellness not as a place to be reached or something to be achieved, but more as a state of being. It's a state of being. It's striving for that state.
Like never arriving. It's that journey of,
Exactly. Of a constant
yeah,
working toward. It's the journey. It's the steps you take to get there.
yeah. Because we work out, right? Move your body to keep your physical body in shape, whether it's walking, there's so many ways to be physically well, right? And we talk, and there's a lot of emphasis on that. So I love this idea of mental wellness as well. Like you feed your soul, you feed your spirit, your mind, like the things that we need. And um, because they're all tools, right? I remember thinking at
Absolutely.
one point, like, why do I need to go to these 12 steps? Why do I need to do this? Why do I need to do that? And it's like, I choose to do that. I get to do this because I know how much happier, better it makes me feel and how much more I can hold and contain for other people when I take care of myself first. And it sounds like a cliche statement, but the whole gas mask, or not the gas mask, the oxygen, the oxygen mask,
Absolutely.
putting the oxygen mask on us first, right? The same
It's
idea.
it's not self-care is not a luxury that that we get or it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's a part of our daily life. And when we are doing those things, when it's exactly what you just said, when you're exercising, when you're eating right, when you feel a certain way, it impacts everything about you when you're doing those things, from the food we eat to meditation to movement. I mean, so many of us can be sedentary right now, sitting in front of computers and all day long and not moving enough. But every time we move our body, it shifts our mindset. Even if we're depressed or overwhelmed or frustrated, even if we're intent on feeling down, when we move our body, it automatically shifts our mindset to a more positive space. Whether we wanted to or not, we're going to shift. Mood follows action. That's the biggest thing that I learned in recovery a very long time ago. Mood follows action. And it's so important. But mental wellness and mental health are very different. And so many people lump them together, and I see them as two completely separate entities.
I love that. I do love that because it's like what we get to do, right? The wellness
Mhm.
is what we choose to do, what we get to do, how we show up. I love this. Um, Michele, we have women on here, and I would love to know that share their three things, right? Because this has been so full of hope and wisdom, and your journey is remarkable, right? Resilience is the word that comes to mind 100% when through this conversation. But what are three ways that women who are going through any transition or challenge in life, what are your top three favorite tools, sayings, exercises that have really helped you along this emotional wellness, mental wellness journey?
There's a couple things. Meditation is a big one for me. Meditation is something that I struggled with so hard when I first
Yeah.
came in. I was very resistant to it. I couldn't quiet my mind. I wanted nothing to do with it. And now it's very much become a daily practice. So meditation is a big one that has had a profound effect on my life. And that was learning how to observe my thoughts and not absorb them, like we talked about earlier, to let them pass. I thought that it meant I had to empty my mind, but it doesn't mean that at all, which I wasn't aware of. So meditation is a big one. Another part of my mental wellness routine is tapping. Tapping has become very much a part of my routine. And there's so many videos out there on tapping to find your true love or tapping for money mindset, tapping for so many different things. But and if you're not familiar with tapping, it's uses your fingertips. It's called a psychological acupuncture because it balances the energy systems of the body and it uses your fingertips instead of needles on the 9 meridian points. But even the simple act, if you can't go through and do all of the points, even being able to tap on the body with the breath um, can bring someone back, is a grounding technique to bring someone back to their body in a moment of stress. So if you're somewhere that you can't sit here and do all that, even just going like this with the breath can bring someone back to their bodies. So tapping.
So anybody listening, so what Michelle's doing is kind of tapping on her chest, like collarbone type area, right? And breathing. And
Absolutely. Just
I love
breathing
this.
and tapping on your chest can bring someone back to the body. So that can be really powerful. And one of the simple exercises that I like to do, well, I'm going to give you four things. Um,
Yes.
Gratitude is
Hmm.
another one in there that is a game changer in any moment because I find it impossible
Hmm.
to be negative or unhappy when you have a grateful heart.
Hmm.
So keeping a gratitude list. So meditation, tapping,
Mhm.
gratitude, practicing gratitude. But another exercise that I love to do is catch it, check it, change it. And it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, which is that awareness, catching your thoughts, being aware of what you're thinking. And that might mean slowing it down by pausing or really catching what it is you're thinking and then checking it. Can I know without a shadow of a doubt that what I'm believing right now in this moment is indeed true? So asking yourself that question, and it's just yes or no. It's not yes, but,
Yeah,
or, and this big long, it's a yes or no answer.
I
Can
love
I
that.
know that this is true, what I'm believing? So checking your thoughts. And usually 9 times out of 10, that answer is no. You can't know that what you're believing without a shadow of a doubt is true. And that makes letting it go, that makes changing it easier once you check it. So it's kind of catchy. Check it, catch it. I said it wrong. Catch it, check it, change it. But doing that practice in the moment can really help to become aware, to acknowledge, and then to let go.
That's so powerful. I love that. And I love the yes or no, the explanation of it's not a yes, but, or
No,
it's
it's
yes
not
or
a,
no, because
exactly yes or no.
that's when we start to negotiate with ourselves, right? Yes, but.
Yes, but. Yes, but. In fact, I had someone that always used to tell me that in early sobriety. She would always say, Michele, your new name is Yes, but. She would tell me something and I'd say, yes, but, yes, but.
Yes,
But no, it's yes or no. Simple answer.
I love. This was such a wonderful conversation. Oh my
Thank you
gosh,
so much.
thank
Thank you
you.
for having me.
Tell people where they can find you if they want to find more information about the work that you do or more
So
about
you
you.
can find me on my website, michellecapots.com. I'm a 1L Michele,
I love that.
michellecapots.com.
I'm a 1L Hillary.
A 1L, you're 1L Hillary. It's a pet peeve. Everyone always puts
Yes.
2 L's in there.
Yes.
1L Michele, michellecapots.com. And I'm also very active on Instagram, which is michellecapots.com spelled out. Michele Capots, DOTCOM, completely spelled out, michellecapots.com, and on Facebook. But thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
having me. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Me, me too. Next time in person. Thanks so much for being
Absolutely.
here.